You have exactly 30 minutes to clear out your trash. Bianca tossed her Hermes bag onto the oak, looking at me like a stain on her heels. She thinks I am just a defeated daughter, forgetting I used to hunt Wall Street embezzlers. Inside the garbage bag she forced me to carry. I found something deadlier than a gun evidence that will turn tomorrow's inheritance meeting into the graveyard of her career. My name is Melina Hawthorne, and until 48 hours ago, my life was defined by the rhythmic hissing of an oxygen concentrator and the beep of a pulse monitor. Now, the silence in the room was heavier than the machinery I was dismantling. It was a thick, suffocating blanket that smelled of rubbing alcohol and lemon-scented floor cleaner. I folded the plastic tubing of the cannula, the one that had rested against my father's cheekbones for the last 6 months, and placed it gently into a cardboard box. My hands were dry. The skin around my cuticles cracked from constant washing, but they were steady. As a corporate compliance officer, I had been trained to remain clinical in the face of disaster, to catalog the wreckage before feeling the impact. I was doing the same thing now. Only the wreckage was the empty shell of a hospital bed in the center of my father's study. My father, Robert Hawthorne, had been a man of steel and concrete, a structural engineer who saw the world in terms of load-bearing capacities and stress tests. He had built bridges that spanned rivers across 3 continents. Now, he was ash in a ceramic urn sitting on the mantelpiece in the living room, and I was packing away the evidence of his slow, agonizing decline. I taped the box shut. The sound of the packing tape ripping off the roll was a violent tear in the quiet afternoon. Then the front door slammed open downstairs. The silence did not just break, it shattered. The click-clack of stilettos on the hardwood floor echoed like gunfire, followed by the heavy tread of men in dress shoes. Voices, loud and performative, filled the hallway that should have been a sanctuary. The foyer has excellent natural light. As you can see, we will need to remove those drapes immediately. They are too heavy. Buyers want air. They want potential. I recognized that voice. It was a voice that could curdle milk. Bianca. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles of my gray sweatpants. I had not slept in 30 hours. My hair was tied back in a messy knot, and I wore one of my father's old flannels. I looked like a ghost haunting my own life. When I opened the study door, the invasion was already underway. Bianca stood in the center of the living room, gesturing wildly with a manicured hand. She was wearing black, but it was the kind of black you wear to a cocktail party, not a funeral. The dress was cut low, the hem high, and her makeup was flawless. Flanking her were 3 people I assumed were real estate agents, looking around the house with the hungry, dead eyes of sharks sensing blood in the water. They were appraising the house. My father had been cremated less than 24 hours ago. The urn was still sitting right there, invisible to them. "Bianca," I said. My voice was raspy from disuse. She spun around, her expression shifting from saleswoman charm to undisguised disdain in a nanosecond. "Oh, Melina, you are still here. I told the stagers the house would be empty by noon." "We haven't even held the memorial service," I said, gripping the banister. "What are these people doing here?" "Market analysis. Darling, the market waits for no one, certainly not for sentimentality," Bianca said, checking her watch. It was a platinum piece that probably cost more than my car. "Actually, I am glad you are down here. We have business to discuss. Since you are leaving today." She snapped her fingers, and a man stepped out from the shadows of the dining room. He was tall, wearing a suit that cost $5,000 but fit him like a second skin. Elias Thorne. I knew him by reputation. He was the kind of lawyer corporations hired when they wanted to bury a whistleblower or hide toxic waste dumping. He was a fixer in a silk tie. "Ms. Hawthorne," Elias said, his voice smooth and devoid of warmth. He did not offer his hand. "What is going on?" I asked. Walking down the stairs, my legs felt heavy. "Administrative housekeeping," Bianca said. She reached into her oversized designer tote and pulled out a single sheet of paper. She thrust it toward me. "This is for you." I took the paper. It was an invoice. "Room and board." 24 months at $2,500 per month. Utilities and food contribution, $10,000. Total due $70,000. I stared at the numbers. The ink seemed to swim before my eyes. You are charging me rent. For the 2 years I lived here. You were living here rent-free, Melina, Bianca said, examining her fingernails. While I was out working, maintaining my lifestyle, you were mooching off the family estate. It is only fair. We will deduct it from whatever pittance Dad might have left you. If there is anything left after debts. I was not mooching, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I was wiping his chin. I was changing his diapers. I was managing his medication schedules because you and your mother could not be bothered to visit more than once a month for a photo opportunity. I quit my job to keep him out of a nursing home. That was your choice, Bianca said with a shrug. Nobody asked you to be a martyr. Now, about the will. Elias stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. Mr. Hawthorne executed a codicil to his last will and testament 3 months ago. Given his declining health, he felt it best to consolidate the estate management. He left the entirety of the real estate, liquid assets, and intellectual property to his wife, Mrs. Elena Hawthorne, and her daughter, Bianca. The heir left the room. 3 months ago, I looked at Elias. 3 months ago, my father was on high-dose morphine. He was drifting in and out of consciousness. He did not know what day of the week it was, let alone understand complex estate planning. He had moments of lucidity, Elias said, his eyes flat. I was present. It was notarized. It is ironclad. Ms. Hawthorne, you receive a one-time cash gift of $5,000, contingent on your non-interference with the probate process. And of course, the invoice Bianca just gave you is outstanding debt to the estate. So technically, you owe us $65,000. It was a setup, a cold, calculated, brutal setup. They had waited until he was too weak to fight, guided his hand, or perhaps just forged it. And now they were erasing me. I looked at them. I looked at the real estate agents pretending to inspect the crown molding so they would not have to witness the execution. I could feel the old instinct rising in me, the compliance officer who spots the discrepancy in the ledger. But I was too tired. Grief is a physical weight, and right now, it was crushing me. I did not have the energy to scream. Fine, I said. The word tasted like ash. Bianca blinked. Clearly disappointed she did not get a tantrum. Fine. Keep the house, I said. Keep the money. I do not want your blood money. I looked at the urn on the mantel. I just want one thing. In his study, on the bottom shelf of the bookcase. There is a row of black leather notebooks, his engineering journals. He wrote in them for 40 years. Drafts, sketches, theories on concrete compression. They are of no value to you. Let me take them, and I will leave. The room went silent. Bianca looked at Elias, then back at me. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a cat that has just cornered a mouse and realizes the mouse has nowhere to go. Oh, those dusty old things, Bianca laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. I am afraid you are too late. What do you mean? We are staging the house. Melina, clean lines, minimalism, no clutter, she said, waving her hand vaguely. The stager said the shelves looked too heavy. All that old paper. It smelled musty. We cleared it out this morning. My heart stopped. Where are they? The sanitation truck came at 8 o'clock, she said. But the recycling bin was full, so I think the cleaners just tossed them in the general dumpster out back, unless the garbage men already came by. I did not wait for her to finish. I turned and ran. I ran through the kitchen, my socks slipping on the tiles, and burst out the back door. The rain hit me like a physical blow. It was a freezing, gray November rain, the kind that soaks through to the bone in seconds. The sky was the color of a bruise. I sprinted across the wet grass to the alleyway behind the garage, where the large industrial dumpsters were kept. The lid of the main dumpster was open. Rain was pouring into it. I did not hesitate. I climbed up on the metal step and vaulted inside. The smell was overwhelming, rotting food, wet cardboard, and the metallic tang of old coffee grounds. I was standing knee-deep in the refuse of the house I grew up in. I saw my father's old slippers. I saw the throw pillow from his favorite chair, stained with coffee, and there, buried under a bag of kitchen waste. I saw the black leather spines. I dug. I clawed at the garbage with my bare hands. My fingernails broke. I did not care. I pulled the journals out. One by one. They were wet. The pages were swollen with rainwater and grime. I wiped them frantically with the hem of my flannel shirt, trying to shield them with my body. No, 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 I whispered, my voice breaking. Please, not this. Anything but this. I clutched the stack of wet notebooks to my chest, shivering uncontrollably. The rain plastered my hair to my face. I was 32 years old. I had a master's degree in finance. I was a respected professional. And here I was, standing in a dumpster, hugging trash, while the people who stole my inheritance stood dry and warm inside. I looked up at the house. Through the large bay window of the living room, I could see the warm glow of the chandelier. Bianca was standing there. She was holding her phone up, the ring light attached to it glowing softly. She had positioned herself next to the mantelpiece, right beside my father's urn. She was posing. I could see her wiping away a tear, looking tragically beautiful. She was speaking to the camera, her hand resting visibly on the urn. I climbed out of the dumpster, my legs scraping against the rusted metal. I stood in the alley, the rain washing the filth down my legs, and I pulled out my own cracked phone. I opened the social media app and found her profile. Live now. I tapped on it. Bianca's face filled my screen, filtered to perfection. It is just so hard, she was whispering to her 50,000 followers. Daddy Bob was the light of our lives. We are just devastated. Thank you all for the donations to the memorial fund. We just want to give him the send-off he deserves. Please, keep our family in your prayers during this difficult transition. The comments were rolling in. So brave. Stay strong. Queen. Sending love. She looked up from the phone screen in the window and saw me standing in the rain, covered in slime, holding the wet books. She did not look away. She did not look ashamed. She stared right at me, and for a split second, the mask slipped. She smirked. It was a tiny, imperceptible twitch of her lips, invisible to her audience, but clear as day to me. Then she looked back at her phone and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the sound of a steel cable finally finding its tension. The grief that had been drowning me for months suddenly froze. It hardened. It turned into something sharp and cold and heavy in my gut. I looked down at the ruined journals in my arms. My father had spent his life building foundations that could withstand hurricanes. He taught me that structure is everything. He taught me that if you look close enough, every system has a flaw. Every fraudulent ledger has a missing number. Every lie has a crack. Bianca thought she had buried me. She thought I was just trash to be thrown out with the old papers. I wiped the rain from my eyes. The shivering stopped. I was not going to cry. Not anymore. I was going to audit them. I was going to find the crack in their perfect structure, and I was going to bring the whole thing crashing down. I turned away from the house, clutching the wet legacy of Robert Hawthorne against my chest, and began the long walk to the bus stop. The hunt had begun. The Neon Palms Motel was exactly the kind of place people went when they wanted to disappear, or when they had already been erased. The sign outside flickered with a buzzing. Dying light, casting long, erratic shadows across the parking lot where asphalt gave way to weeds. I paid for the room with cash, $60 for a single night, and the clerk behind the bulletproof glass did not even ask for my identification. He just slid a plastic key card under the slot and went back to watching a game show on a portable television. Room 104 smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon disinfectant, a scent that triggered a sharp, phantom pain in my chest, reminding me of the hospital room I had just vacated, but I pushed the memory down. Grief was a luxury I could not afford. Not tonight. Tonight, I was not a grieving daughter. I was a weapon. I locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. Then I dragged the only chair in the room, a wobbly wooden thing with vinyl upholstery, over to the small desk. I reached into the plastic garbage bag Bianca had forced me to carry and pulled out the salvage. It was not much. A cracked tablet I had fished out of the recycling bin earlier that week, when I realized my father's cognitive functions were slipping faster than the doctors predicted. And my old laptop, a machine that was 5 years old, but modified with encryption software that would make a government agency jealous. It was heavy, clunky, and currently my only lifeline to the truth. I booted up the laptop, the fan whirred to life, sounding like a jet engine in the quiet room. While the operating system loaded, I plugged in the cracked tablet. The screen was a spiderweb of fractures, but the digitizer still worked. This tablet was logged into my father's personal cloud account. It was the one device Bianca had missed during her purge because it had slipped behind the bedside table months ago. I cracked my knuckles. The sound was loud in the small room. For 5 years before I came home to care for my father, I was not just a compliance officer. I was the person boards of directors called when they suspected their chief financial officer was buying yachts with pension funds. I was a forensic auditor. I specialized in finding the needles in haystacks made of shell companies and offshore accounts. I had once brought down a pharmaceutical CEO in Chicago by tracing the purchase of a rare vintage Ferrari back to a charity front in the Cayman Islands. They called me the surgeon because I could cut the cancer out of a company without killing the host. But tonight, I was not interested in saving the patient. I was interested in an autopsy. I navigated to my father's primary banking portal on the tablet. As expected, the biometric login failed. My fingerprint was not on file, and my father's face was no longer here to unlock it. I switched to the password entry. I tried the old password first. Structure 1985. Access denied. I tried his backup. Concrete steel. Access denied. Bianca. She had been busy. She must have gained power of attorney or used his phone to reset the credentials while he was sedated. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. If she had changed the password, she would have had to set up new security questions. I clicked on Forgot Password. The screen refreshed. A single question appeared. What is the name of your first pet? I almost laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. This was the difference between an amateur and a professional. My father's first pet was a tortoise named Archimedes, but Bianca would not know that. She did not know anything about his childhood. She only knew her own world. I typed in Archimedes. Incorrect answer. Of course, she had reset the questions to answer them herself. She had locked the door but left the key under the mat because she was too lazy to carry it. I thought about Bianca. I thought about what she loved. She loved herself, her image, and her purebred Pomeranian that had died of a heart defect last summer, the dog she had cried over on Instagram for 3 weeks to garner sympathy engagement. I typed in Coco. Access granted. Please reset your password. Got you, I whispered. I did not reset the password yet. I just bypassed the gateway and entered the dashboard. The numbers flooded the screen. I tethered the tablet to my laptop and ran a script to scrape the data, pulling down 24 months of transaction history into a secure spreadsheet. The download bar crawled across the screen. While it loaded, I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. Dark circles under my eyes, pale skin, lips chapped from dehydration. But the eyes were sharp. They were awake. I returned to the desk. The download was complete. I opened the spreadsheet. To an untrained eye, it was just rows and columns of dates, merchants, and amounts. To me, it was a narrative. Money tells a story that people try to hide. It tells you who they are, what they value, and what they are afraid of. I scrolled past the medical bills, the hospice care payments, the pharmacy charges. Those were legitimate. Then I saw the first anomaly. 6 months ago, right around the time my father slipped into his first coma, the withdrawals began. Small at first. $5,000 to a vendor listed as consulting services, then $10,000, then $20,000. I filtered the data by recipient. One name stood out, repeating with alarming frequency, Sterling Solutions, LLC. In the last 3 months alone, over $200,000 had been siphoned from my father's operational accounts to Sterling Solutions. The justification codes listed them as interior design consultation and asset management fees. I opened a new tab and ran a search on Sterling Solutions. No website, no LinkedIn profile, no Yelp reviews. I accessed the State Business Registry database. It was a public record, but you had to know where to look. I punched in the name. Sterling Solutions, LLC, incorporation date, August 14th, 2025. Registered Agent United Corporate Services, mailing address, P.O. Box, 492, Wilmington, Delaware. It was a classic shell company, a ghost. It existed only on paper to catch money and move it somewhere else. But who owned it? I dug deeper. Cross-referencing the registered agent with other filings. It was a dead end, which was the point. But then I looked at the payment dates again. Every single transfer to Sterling Solutions occurred exactly 2 days after Bianca posted about a shopping haul or a luxury getaway on her social media. June 3rd, transfer of $15,000. June 5th, Bianca posts a photo of a new diamond bracelet. Caption, treating myself because self-care is mandatory. August 12th, transfer of $30,000. August 14th, Bianca checks into a 5-star resort in Turks and Caicos. She was not just embezzling, she was doing it with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. She was draining the estate dry before my father was even dead, using a shell company to wash the funds so they would look like legitimate business expenses. But $200,000 was petty cash compared to what I found next. I navigated to the pending transactions folder. There was a scheduled wire transfer set to execute tomorrow at noon. The amount made my breath catch in my throat. $5 million. The recipient was not Sterling Solutions. It was Vanguard Heavy Industries. My blood ran cold. Vanguard was my father's biggest competitor. For 20 years, they had tried to buy him out, to crush his firm, to steal his patents. My father hated them. He called them butchers who sacrificed safety for profit. He would never, ever do business with them. I opened the email archives on the tablet. Searching for Vanguard, I found a thread between Elias Thorne and the CEO of Vanguard. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Subject Project Atlas Acquisition, Elias. The principal is incapacitated. The acting power of attorney is ready to sign. We can expedite the transfer of the Hawthorne compression patent rights immediately following the probate hearing. The price is agreed at $5 million. Please have the counter-signatories ready. My hands shook, not from fear, but from rage. The Hawthorne compression patent. It was my father's life work. A method of curing concrete that increased its tensile strength by 40% while reducing drying time by half. It was revolutionary. It was worth hundreds of millions in infrastructure contracts, and Bianca was selling it for a quick $5 million. She was selling a gold mine for the price of a used car, because she wanted fast cash to fund her lifestyle. She did not understand what she was holding. She thought it was just a piece of paper. I sat back in the creaky chair. The neon light from the sign outside flickered red, bathing the room in a bloody glow. I had enough right now to call the police. I could call the FBI. I could show them the embezzlement, the fraudulent shell company, the unauthorized sale of intellectual property. I could stop the transfer. But if I stopped it now, what would happen? Bianca would cry. She would claim ignorance. She would say Elias manipulated her. She would say she thought she was doing what was best for the company. She would get a slap on the wrist, maybe probation. Elias would lose his license, but he had enough money stashed away to retire in the Caribbean. They would survive. I did not want them to survive. I looked at the scheduled transfer again. Pending execution tomorrow. 12 o'clock post-meridian. For the crime to be federal wire fraud, the wire has to be sent. For the crime to be corporate espionage and grand larceny, the contract has to be signed. They had to cross the finish line. I needed Bianca to walk into that meeting room tomorrow, sit at the head of the table, and sign her name on the dotted line. I needed her to believe she had won. I needed her to smugly accept the congratulations. I needed the money to hit the wire queue. Only then would the trap be irreversible. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, leaving me in the semi-darkness. I was not going to sleep tonight. I had work to do. I needed to prepare the exhibits. I needed to organize the timeline. I needed to make sure that when I walked into Vanguard headquarters tomorrow, I was not just bringing allegations, I was bringing a verdict. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the thin, stained curtain. The rain was still falling, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. "You want a show? Bianca," I whispered to the empty parking lot. "I will give you a show." I turned back to the desk. My father's journals were drying on the heater. The ink blurred but legible. The math was still there. The truth was still there. And tomorrow, I was going to use it to bury them under the weight of their own greed. The auditor was in. And the audit was just beginning. The screen of the tablet hummed with a low, artificial light, the only source of illumination in the cramped motel room. I had spent the last hour combing through financial records, building a cage for Bianca and Elias, but my eyes were burning, and my soul felt hollowed out. I decided to close the spreadsheet. I needed a break from the numbers. I needed him. I navigated away from the banking portal and opened his email client. I did not expect to find anything new in the inbox, just automated billing notifications and newsletters from engineering forums. But then my finger hovered over the drafts folder. There was one message there. It was dated 3 weeks ago. The subject line was blank. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 3 weeks ago. He was barely lucid. He could hardly hold a spoon. How had he typed this? I clicked on it. The text was filled with typos, the sentences fragmented, evidence of his trembling hands and clouded mind. But the voice was undeniably Robert Hawthorne. "My dearest Melina, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And if I am gone, I know exactly what is happening. The sharks are circling. I see the way Elena looks at the house when she thinks I'm asleep. I hear Bianca on the phone with lawyers. They think I am a senile old fool. They think the medication has taken my mind. They are wrong. My body is failing. But I am still an engineer. I still know how to spot structural weakness. I know about the will. Melina, Elias brought the papers when you were at the pharmacy. He guided my hand. I was too weak to stop him. But I was not too weak to plan. I know they will take the house. They will take the accounts. They will try to leave you with nothing because they fear you. They fear your integrity. But they do not know about the garage. They never go in the garage. It is too dirty for them. Too real. Go to the server rack, panel 4. The code is your birthday. The real legacy is not in the bank. It is in the work. It belongs to you. It has always belonged to you. I am sorry I could not stay longer. I am so proud of the woman you have become. Do not let them break you. You are made of stronger stuff than they are. Love, Dad." I stared at the screen until the words blurred into gray streaks. A sob rose in my throat, violent and sharp, but I swallowed it down. He had been alone with them. He had been trapped in his own failing body, watching them plot his demise, and he had used his last ounces of strength to leave me a map. He did not want my tears. He wanted my action. I looked at the time on the corner of the screen. It was 2:00 in the morning. I grabbed my coat. The taxi ride back to the suburbs was surreal. The city lights faded into the darkness of the tree-lined avenues of my childhood. The house, my house, their house loomed in the distance, dark and imposing. There were no lights on. Bianca and her mother were likely asleep, dreaming of the millions they thought they had secured. I did not go to the front gate. I knew the perimeter better than anyone. I slipped through a gap in the hedges on the north side, the wet branches slapping against my face, cold and stinging. I moved through the shadows of the garden, avoiding the motion sensor lights I had helped install 2 years ago. I knew exactly where the blind spots were. The garage was a detached structure, a 3-car workshop where my father had spent his weekends covered in grease and concrete dust. It was his sanctuary. To Bianca, it was just a storage unit for her unused gym equipment and boxes of seasonal decorations. I approached the side door. It had a digital keypad. I typed in the numbers, 0824-1994, my birthday. The lock beeped softly. A green light flashed, and the mechanism clicked open. I slipped inside and closed the door gently behind me. The smell hit me instantly, a mix of motor oil, sawdust, and ozone. It was the smell of my childhood. It smelled like safety. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and swept the beam across the room. There were his tools, hung meticulously on the pegboard. There was the vintage motorcycle he had been restoring for a decade, and in the corner, humming quietly, was the server rack. My father was old school, but he was paranoid about data security. He kept his own local servers for his engineering schematics. I walked over to the black metal cabinet. Panel 4 was near the bottom. I knelt on the cold concrete floor, ignoring the pain in my knees. I found the small release latch and popped the panel open. Inside, taped to the hard drive chassis with blue electrical tape, was a silver USB drive. It looked innocuous. It looked like something you would find in a junk drawer. I peeled the tape back and took the drive. My hands were trembling. I needed to know what was on it. I moved to the workbench where an old diagnostic laptop sat gathering dust. I prayed it still had power. I pressed the button. It groaned to life. The battery indicator flashing red. I plugged in the USB. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was titled The Keystone. I opened it. Inside was a legal document, a deed of assignment. I scanned the legibility. It was dated 5 years ago, long before the sickness, long before the shell companies, long before Elias Thorne slithered into our lives. I, Robert Hawthorne, being of sound mind, hereby irrevocably assign, transfer, and convey all rights, title, and interest in the patent known as the Hawthorne compression method to Melina Hawthorne. My breath hitched. He had never transferred the patent to the company. The company Hawthorne Engineering had a license to use the patent, but it did not own the patent. I owned it. I had owned it for 5 years. I scrolled down. There was more. A digital certificate of registration with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, listing me as the sole assignee, and a video file. I clicked play. My father's face filled the screen. He looked younger, healthier. He was sitting in this very garage. "Melina," the video Robert said, "if you are watching this, it means I am dead, and you have found the drive. I never told you about the assignment because I wanted you to build your own career first. I did not want you to rest on my laurels. But I also knew that one day, the wolves would come for the company. This is your shield. The company is just a shell. Melina, the value is in the idea, and the idea is yours. It always has been." The video ended. I sat there in the dark garage, the blue light of the monitor illuminating the tears that finally spilled over. He had protected me, even from beyond the grave. He was still protecting me. Bianca was selling the company to Vanguard tomorrow for $5 million. She thought she was selling the goose that laid the golden eggs, but she was not. She was selling an empty cage, without this patent. The company was worthless, and she had no right to sell the patent because she did not own it. If she signed that contract tomorrow, she would be committing fraud on a massive scale. She would be selling property that belonged to me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the moment. I pulled it out, a text message from a number I did not save, but recognized, Elias Thorne, Ms. Hawthorne. This is a courtesy notification. The reading of the will and the finalization of the estate assets will take place tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning at the Vanguard Law Group headquarters in Manhattan. Your attendance is not required, but you are welcome to come and collect your check for $5,000. Please dress appropriately. I stared at the message. The arrogance was breathtaking. Please dress appropriately. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. I squeezed it until the edges dug into my palm. "Don't worry, Elias," I whispered to the darkness. I will be dressed. I shut down the laptop, pocketed the drive, and slipped out of the garage. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp and cold. I did not look back at the house. It was not my home anymore. It was just a crime scene waiting to be processed. Back at the motel, the sun was threatening to rise. The sky was turning a bruised purple over the skyline. I did not sleep. I could not sleep. I opened the garment bag I had managed to save from the closet before Bianca threw me out. Inside was my armor. It was a bespoke suit I had bought 3 years ago after I closed the biggest compliance case of my career. Italian wool, midnight blue, sharp lapels, tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. It was not the clothes of a caretaker. It was not the clothes of a victim. It was the uniform of an executioner. I showered, scrubbing the smell of the motel and the garage off my skin. I washed my hair and dried it straight, pulling it back into a severe, polished bun. I applied my makeup minimal, sharp, precise, no soft edges. I stepped into the trousers. I buttoned the crisp, white silk shirt. I pulled on the blazer. I stood before the full-length mirror on the back of the motel door. The woman staring back at me was not the weeping daughter who had begged for her father's journals. She was Melina Hawthorne, senior risk officer. She was the woman who made grown men sweat in boardrooms. I looked at my reflection. "They think they buried you," I said to the mirror. "They forgot you were a seed." I picked up the USB drive and placed it into the inner pocket of my blazer, right over my heart. I picked up the stack of printed bank statements and the evidence of the shell company. I put them into my leather attaché case. I walked out of the room and into the dawn. New York City was waking up. The streets were gray and gritty, filled with the noise of garbage trucks and early commuters. It was a massive, indifferent machine that chewed people up and spat them out. I stood on the curb, waiting for the car I had summoned. I felt small against the towering skyscrapers, but I did not feel weak. Loneliness is a strange thing. It can destroy you, or it can clarify you. Standing there, with no family, no home, and no job. I should have felt terrified, but I felt a strange, cold clarity. I was alone. Yes, but that meant I had nothing left to lose, and a person with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person in the world. The black sedan pulled up. The driver nodded to me. "Where to, ma'am?" I climbed into the back seat, setting my briefcase down next to me. "The financial district," I said, my voice steady as steel. "Vanguard Plaza. And please, do not rush. I want to arrive exactly on time." The car pulled away from the curb. Merging into the traffic, I watched the city blur past the window. Today was not just about money. It was not even about the patent. It was about the look on Bianca's face when she realizes that the sister she threw away was the only thing standing between her and prison. It was about Elias Thorne realizing that he had underestimated the quiet girl in the corner. It was about honor. I touched the pocket where the USB lay. "Let's go to work, Dad," I whispered. The gridlock on the Brooklyn Bridge had been absolute. A wall of red taillights stretched as far as the eye could see, shimmering in the morning haze like a river of blood. I had sat in the back of the hired sedan for 10 agonizing minutes, watching the digital clock on the dashboard tick away my buffer time. Every minute lost was a crack in my armor. I could not arrive flustered. I could not arrive late. I needed to control the environment, and to do that, I needed to be there before the enemy. So I had done the unthinkable for a woman wearing a $3,000 suit. I tossed 2 $20 bills at the driver, opened the door, and stepped out into the exhaust-choked air. I walked the remaining half-mile to the subway station, the wind whipping stray strands of hair across my face, and descended into the belly of the beast. The train was a metallic worm screaming through the darkness of the tunnels. It was packed shoulder to shoulder with the morning workforce of Manhattan. I stood near the doors, my hand gripping the cold steel pole, my knuckles white. Around me, the city breathed. There were tired nurses ending their shifts, their eyes rimmed with red. There were young interns in ill-fitting polyester suits, checking their phones with frantic energy. There were construction workers smelling of dust and drywall. I felt invisible among them. They saw a woman in a sharp navy suit, perhaps a lawyer or a banker, just another cog in the financial machine. They did not see the USB drive burning a hole in my pocket. They did not see the devastation I was carrying in my briefcase. To them, I was just background noise. The train screeched to a halt at the Wall Street station. The doors hissed open, and the human tide surged out. I let myself be carried by the current, moving with the rhythmic shuffle of hundreds of feet up the concrete stairs and out into the gray light of the financial district. It was 8:15 in the morning. I was 45 minutes early. The air down here was different. It smelled of money and anxiety. The skyscrapers rose like canyon walls on either side of the narrow streets, blocking out the sun and creating wind tunnels that cut through even the heaviest wool coats. I walked with purpose, my heels clicking a steady staccato on the pavement. I knew this district. I had spent a decade hunting wolves in these very buildings. I needed a moment. I needed to calibrate. I stopped at a small coffee kiosk on the corner of William Street, not to buy anything, but to use the reflection in the glass window to check my appearance. My reflection stared back steely, composed, terrifyingly calm. I adjusted the lapel of my blazer. I smoothed the front of my trousers. I checked the clasp of my briefcase. Everything was precise. Everything was in order. I took a deep breath, inhaling the cold city air. In 45 minutes, I would walk into the Vanguard building and destroy my stepsister's life. The thought did not bring me joy. It brought me a cold, heavy sense of duty. It was like finalizing a foreclosure. It was unpleasant, but the numbers demanded it. I turned away from the window and began the walk toward Vanguard Plaza. The building was a monolith of black glass and steel, soaring 50 stories into the sky. It was designed to intimidate. It was designed to make you feel small. As I approached the block, I saw that the sidewalk directly in front of the main entrance was obstructed. Orange plastic netting and yellow caution tape cordoned off a section of the pavement. A sign read, "Sidewalk Repair. Apologies for the inconvenience." Behind the netting, the ground had been torn up, exposing the wet, muddy earth beneath the concrete. A temporary wooden walkway had been laid down, but it was narrow, forcing the stream of rushing pedestrians to bottleneck. The noise was deafening. Jackhammers rattled against stone. A cement mixer churned loudly near the curb. The city was always rebuilding itself, covering up the old with the new, just like Bianca was trying to do with our family. I slowed my pace, timing my approach to avoid the worst of the crowd. That was when I saw him. He was standing near the edge of the construction zone, dangerously close to the muddy pit where the sidewalk had been removed. He did not belong here, in a sea of charcoal suits and trench coats. He was a jarring note of discord. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s or early 70s. He wore a heavy, oversized coat that looked like it had been salvaged from a dumpster 3 winters ago. The wool was matted and stained with grease. Underneath, layers of mismatched flannel shirts peeked out. He wore a knit cap pulled low over his ears, and his beard was a tangled mess of gray and white. He was clutching a thick stack of papers against his chest. They were not in a folder or a briefcase. They were loose, dog-eared, and yellowed, held together only by his desperate grip. As I watched, a large delivery truck rumbled past the construction site. It hit a pothole filled with rainwater and sludge. The splash was enormous. A wave of black, oily water erupted from the tire and arced over the sidewalk. The pedestrians nearest to the curb scattered like pigeons, cursing and shielding their expensive coats, but the old man was too slow. He tried to turn, but his movements were stiff with age and cold. The wave of sludge hit him squarely in the back. The shock made him stumble. His foot caught on the edge of the temporary wooden walkway. He pitched forward. His hands flew out to break his fall, and the stack of papers went airborne. It happened in slow motion. I watched the yellowed sheets flutter into the air like wounded birds before descending into the mud. The old man hit the ground hard, his knees slamming into the wet plywood, his hands sinking into the muck of the construction pit. "No!" he cried out. His voice was a rasp, a sound of pure panic. No, no, no! He scrambled to his knees, ignoring the filth covering his trousers. He began to claw at the mud, trying to retrieve the papers. They were soaking up the water instantly, the ink bleeding, the edges tearing as he pulled them from the mire. "Please," he shouted to the passing crowd. "Help me. These are important. Please." I stood 10 feet away, frozen. The reaction of the crowd was a masterclass in modern apathy. A young man in a tailored suit, carrying a leather portfolio, stepped deftly over the old man's outstretched leg. He did not look down. He was typing on his phone, his face illuminated by the blue glow, completely engaged in some digital transaction while a human being struggled at his feet. A woman in a beige trench coat actually scoffed. "Watch where you're going," she muttered, sidestepping a muddy sheet of paper to avoid ruining her suede boots. She looked at the old man with a mixture of disgust and annoyance, as if his poverty was a personal affront to her morning commute. Another man, older, with the silver hair of an executive, kicked one of the papers aside because it had drifted too close to his path. He kicked it with the casual indifference one might use on a piece of trash. The old man was frantic now. He was on his hands and knees, crawling in the slush, gathering the ruined pages. His hands were shaking violently. "They are ruining it," he whimpered. "It is all I have. Please." He looked up. His eyes met the eyes of a passerby, a tall banker with a briefcase. The banker made eye contact for a split second, then looked away, accelerating his pace, effectively erasing the old man from his reality. I felt a tightening in my chest. It was the same feeling I had when I saw a discrepancy in a ledger, a variable that did not fit the equation. I looked at my watch. It was 8:30. I had 30 minutes until the meeting, 30 minutes to present the evidence that would vindicate my father. I looked down at my suit. It was pristine. The midnight blue wool was spotless. The white silk shirt was crisp. If I stepped into that mess, if I knelt in that mud, I would ruin the image I had so carefully constructed. I would walk into the boardroom looking like a wreck. Bianca would laugh. Elias would sneer. My credibility would take a hit before I even opened my mouth. "Walk away." "Melina," a voice in my head whispered, "this is not your problem. You have a mission. You have a legacy to save. You cannot save everyone." I watched the old man reach for a piece of paper that had landed near a puddle of oil. His hand slipped, and he fell onto his side, his cheek grazing the dirty plywood. He looked pathetic. He looked broken. He looked exactly like my father had looked in those final days when he tried to hold a spoon and failed. The memory hit me like a physical blow. The helplessness, the dignity stripped away by circumstance, the way the world just kept spinning while someone's entire universe collapsed. My father had been a great man, a genius engineer, and yet, in the end, he was just a fragile body in a bed, dependent on the mercy of others. If I had not been there, would Bianca have stepped over him like these people were stepping over this man? Yes, she would have. I looked at the Vanguard building, towering above us. It was a monument to power, to success, to the very things the people on this sidewalk were chasing. They were rushing to that building to make deals, to move money, to build empires, and in their rush, they had forgotten the most basic structural law of humanity. When the load becomes too heavy for one pillar, you reinforce it. You do not let it collapse. The old man was trying to wipe the mud off a page with his dirty sleeve, making it worse. He was crying now, silent tears that cut tracks through the grime on his face. I tightened my grip on my briefcase handle. My knuckles turned white. I was an auditor. My job was to correct errors. My job was to enforce compliance with the rules. And the first rule of the universe, the rule my father taught me before he taught me a single mathematical formula, was simple. You do not leave a man behind. I looked at my watch one last time. Screw the suit. I thought. I took a breath, stepped off the clean, dry concrete, and walked into the mud. The yellow caution tape fluttered in the biting wind like a flag of surrender, a flimsy barrier between the sanitized world of the sidewalk and the chaotic mess of the construction pit. I stared at it for a heartbeat, the noise of the city fading into a dull roar behind me. Then, with a decisive movement that felt less like a choice and more like a reflex, I lifted the tape and ducked underneath. The moment my foot left the concrete and hit the temporary plywood walkway, the texture of the world changed. The wood was slick with oil and rain, vibrating from the jackhammers nearby. I took a step toward the edge of the pit where the old man had fallen, and my right heel drove straight through a gap in the wood, plunging deep into the slurry of mud and wet cement beneath. I felt the cold. Thick sludge instantly enveloped my ankle. It seeped into the Italian leather of my pump, soaking the sheer stocking, and wicked up the hem of my midnight blue trousers. The pristine wool, tailored to perfection just 3 years ago in a quiet shop in Milan, drank up the filth greedily. I did not flinch. I did not look down. I just pulled my foot free with a wet sucking sound and kept moving. The old man was still on his knees, his hands trembling as he tried to scoop up the sodden pages of his manuscript. He looked up as my shadow fell over him. His eyes widened. He must have seen a woman in a power suit descending into the muck like some kind of incongruous angel, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by the cold. "Here," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the traffic. "Let me help you." I did not wait for his permission. I crouched down beside him, ignoring the way my knees pressed into the gritty, wet plywood. The dampness immediately soaked through the fabric of my trousers, ruining the crease, staining the dark blue with streaks of gray and brown. I reached out and began gathering the scattered papers. They were a mess. The ink was running, turning the handwritten notes into blue Rorschach tests. The paper was cheap, the kind you buy in bulk at discount stores, and it was disintegrating in the water. But I handled each sheet with the same reverence I would have treated a bearer bond or a notarized deed. I peeled them off the mud, shook off the excess slime, and stacked them carefully in my hand. The old man stopped scrabbling. He sat back on his heels, his chest heaving, and just watched me. "You are ruining them," he rasped, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "Your clothes. You are ruining them." "Fabric can be cleaned," I said, reaching for a sheet that had drifted dangerously close to the spinning tire of a parked excavator. "Dignity is harder to scrub." I handed him the stack I had collected. Our hands brushed. His skin was rough, calloused, and freezing cold. My hand, warm and manicured, looked alien against his. "Can you stand?" I asked. He nodded, but when he tried to push himself up, his leg buckled. I dropped the rest of the papers onto the dry section of the wood and grabbed him by the elbow. I gripped him firmly, taking his weight. He was surprisingly heavy, a density that spoke of a life of hard labor or perhaps just the accumulated weight of survival. "On 3, I said. 1, 2, 3. I hauled him up. My heels slipped in the mud, but I dug in, finding a fulcrum. We rose together, a teetering sculpture of wool and rags. He groaned as he straightened his back, a sound of old bones protesting the damp. We stood there for a moment on the swaying plywood bridge, surrounded by the smell of wet earth and diesel fumes. The stream of pedestrians on the sidewalk had not stopped. They were still flowing past, eyes averted, pretending we did not exist. To them, we were just an obstruction, a stain on the scenery. The old man looked at me. Now that we were standing eye to eye, I realized he was taller than I had thought. Despite the grime on his face, a smear of mud across his cheekbone, grease in his beard, there was something striking about him. His eyes were not the cloudy, defeated eyes I usually saw on the streets. They were a piercing crystalline blue. They were sharp. They were the eyes of a hawk that had been grounded but not tamed. He looked down at my ruined suit. He looked at the mud caked on my shins, the splatter on my white silk cuffs. "Girl," he said, his voice thick with phlegm but steady. "You are making a mistake. You look like you're on your way to somewhere important. A bank, a law firm." He gestured vaguely with a muddy hand toward the skyscrapers. "You are going to walk into an interview looking like you wrestled a pig." I let out a short, dry laugh. It was devoid of humor, but it felt good to release the tension. "No interview," I said, reaching into my pocket. "I am going to attend my own funeral." He cocked his head, a spark of curiosity igniting in those blue eyes. "That is a dark way to start a Tuesday." Or perhaps, I corrected myself, looking up at the black monolith of the Vanguard building. "It is the coronation of a devil. I have not decided yet which one it will be. It depends on how the next hour goes." I pulled out my handkerchief. It was a square of fine cotton with my initials embroidered in the corner. I had ironed it last night, thinking I might need it if I broke down and cried in front of Bianca. I had promised myself I would not cry. But I kept it as a contingency. Now, it had a better purpose. "Hold still," I said. I reached up and gently wiped the smear of mud from his cheekbone. The motion was instinctive. It was the same motion I had used 1,000 times in the last 2 years. I wiped his face with the same gentle, circular stroke I had used to clean my father's face after he had struggled to eat. I wiped away the dirt, revealing the pale, weathered skin beneath. The old man went still. He did not pull away. He watched my face with an intensity that was almost unsettling. For a second, the noise of the city seemed to drop away, leaving just the two of us in a bubble of quiet intimacy. "You have hands like a nurse," he said softly. "I have had practice," I replied, folding the dirty handkerchief and tucking it back into my pocket, not caring that it would stain the lining of my jacket. "My father, he was sick for a long time. He died on Sunday." The old man's expression softened, the sharp lines of his face relaxing into something resembling sympathy. "I am sorry. Losing a father is like losing the roof over your head. Suddenly, you realize how big the sky is, and how cold." I looked at him, surprised. That was a profound thing to say for a man standing in a mud pit. "He was an engineer," I said, my voice catching slightly. "He liked roofs. He liked structure." "And now you are going to see the people who are picking over the bones?" he asked, his gaze drifting to my briefcase. "Something like that," I said. "I am going to see the people who think his life can be summed up in a ledger, the people who think they can buy his legacy for pennies because they think I am weak." I adjusted my cuffs, ignoring the mud stains. "They are about to find out that I am my father's daughter." The old man looked at the stack of wet papers he was clutching. He tapped them against his thigh, straightening the edges. "Hypocrites," he muttered. "The world is full of them. They wear clean suits and have dirty souls. And here we are, covered in mud, trying to keep our papers dry." He looked past me, his eyes locking onto the entrance of the Vanguard building across the plaza. The revolving doors were spinning, swallowing men in gray suits and spitting them out into the lobby. "Vanguard," he said. He read the name on the brass plaque as if it were a curse word. "Yes," I said. "The Vanguard Law Group and Vanguard Heavy Industries. They are all in there, waiting for me." The old man let out a huff of air that might have been a laugh. "Vanguard. I have a bit of history with that place." I raised an eyebrow. "You do?" "Oh, yes," he said, a strange, wry smile touching his lips. It was not the smile of a victim. It was the smile of someone who knows a joke that no one else gets. "They do not like people like me benign around the main entrance. They prefer their reality to be polished. They like to pretend that the foundation does not sit in the dirt." He looked down at himself, at his tattered coat and mismatched shoes. Then he looked at me, at my ruined $3,000 suit. "You know," he said, "you cannot go in there alone. Not like that. They will eat you alive. They smell blood. These lawyers. And right now, you smell like—" He sniffed the air. "Wet cement and righteous indignation." "I do not have a choice," I said, checking my watch again. "I have 20 minutes. Then I will walk you to the door," he announced. I blinked. "Excuse me." "I will walk you," he repeated. He tucked his wet papers under his arm and straightened his posture. It was remarkable. One moment he was a hunched, defeated figure. The next, He stood with a spine of steel. "You helped me up. The least I can do is ensure you get to the elevator without being harassed by the doorman. Besides, it has been a long time since I walked through those doors." "Sir," I said gently, "with all due respect, I do not think they will let you in, and I do not want you to get into trouble on my account." "Trouble?" He chuckled. "I am way past trouble. Girl, trouble is for people who have something to lose. I am just an old man with a stack of wet paper." He stepped off the plywood and onto the sidewalk, ignoring the glares of the pedestrians. He turned and offered me his arm. It was a courtly gesture, something from a bygone era, incongruous with his rags. "Shall we?" he asked. "You said you are going to a coronation. Every queen needs an entourage, even if it is just a beggar." I looked at his arm. I looked at his face. There was a challenge in his eyes, a dare. He was not asking for a handout. He was offering an alliance. I thought about Bianca. I thought about Elias Thorne and his sneering face. I thought about how much they despised anything that wasn't branded, polished, and expensive. Walking in with this man, this smelly, dirty, dignified wreck of a human being would be the ultimate insult to their sensibilities. It would be a disruption, and disruptions were good for audits. They forced people to break their scripts. A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first genuine smile I had felt in days. "My name is Melina," I said. "Arthur," he replied. "My friends call me Arthur." I stepped off the wooden plank and onto the concrete, my muddy shoes squelching. I linked my arm through his. The wool of his coat was scratchy and smelled of rain, but his arm was solid. "Well, Arthur," I said, feeling a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the fight to come. "Let us go make them uncomfortable." We began to walk toward the revolving doors. The crowd parted for us now, not out of respect, but out of sheer confusion. They saw a woman in a ruined couture suit arm in arm with a homeless man, both of them walking with their heads held high, marching toward the citadel of wealth as if they owned the place. I tightened my grip on his arm. I did not know who this Arthur was, or why he wanted to walk into the lion's den with me. But as we approached the glass facade of the Vanguard building, I had the strangest feeling that I had just picked up the most dangerous weapon in my arsenal, and I didn't even know it yet. "Head up, Melina," Arthur whispered as we reached the doors. "Shoulders back. Never let them see you bleed." "I never do," I whispered back. And together, we pushed through the glass and stepped into the lobby. "You should not go into the tiger's den alone," Arthur said, his hand resting lightly on the brass handle of the revolving door but not pushing it. He turned to face me, the wind whipping the loose threads of his coat around his legs. "The lawyers in there are predators. They pack hunt. If you walk in by yourself, even in that suit, they will corner you. They will isolate you." I looked at him, confused by the sudden tactical advice coming from a man who, 5 minutes ago, was face down in the mud. "I do not have a choice. Arthur, my lawyer is one of them. My family is against me. I am a compliance officer. I am used to standing alone against a board of directors." "Compliance is about rules," Arthur countered, his blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me shiver. "This meeting is not about rules. It is about theater. It is a performance. And right now, you are walking onto their stage playing the role of the tragic, defeated daughter." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Change the script, Melina. If you walk in there with a beggar at your side, you break their narrative, they will be so busy staring at me, so busy being disgusted by the mud and the smell, that they will forget to guard their flanks. A beggar causes more distraction than a squadron of lawyers. Confusion is your ally." I hesitated. The logic was insane. It was the kind of lateral thinking that usually got people fired or committed. But as I looked at his weathered face, I saw something familiar. It was the same stubborn, defiant spark I used to see in my father's eyes when he was solving an impossible structural problem. My father used to say that when the bridge is about to collapse, You do not add more weight. You change the load distribution. Arthur was proposing a radical redistribution of the load. They will throw us out, I said, but my resistance was crumbling. They have security. Let them try, Arthur said, a small, dangerous smile playing on his lips. I have never met a security guard I could not reason with. Besides, you look like a woman who knows how to quote a statute or two. I looked at the Vanguard building, then back at Arthur. I took a deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and invigorating. Okay, you are with me, but do not say a word unless I tell you to. I am running this audit. Understood, Arthur said, giving a mock salute that was surprisingly sharp. Lead the way, boss. We pushed through the revolving doors together. The transition was jarring. We went from the chaotic, noisy gray world of the street into a cathedral of silence and light. The lobby of the Vanguard building was a cavernous space of polished white marble and floor-to-ceiling glass. The air was climate-controlled, scented with white tea and money. Our footsteps, my sharp clicks, and Arthur's wet squelches echoed loudly in the vast expanse. Every head turned. A receptionist behind a desk that looked like a sleek spaceship stopped typing. A courier dropped a package. A group of executives near the elevators froze mid-handshake. We were a visual assault. I was a woman in a ruined couture suit, mud caked up to my shins, hair slightly windblown. Arthur was a walking disaster of rags and grime. We looked like we had just crawled out of a swamp to seek vengeance on the civilized world. We made it 10 feet before the intercept happened. 2 security guards, massive men in black tactical uniforms with earpieces, materialized from the sides of the room. They moved with the aggressive speed of bouncers at a nightclub. Ma'am, sir, stop right there, the lead guard barked, holding up a hand the size of a dinner plate. His name tag read, Kowalski. I stopped, planting my feet firmly. Arthur stopped beside me, slouching slightly, making himself look smaller, more harmless. You can't be in here, Kowalski said, his nose wrinkling as the smell of the wet construction site wafted off us. This is private property. The service entrance is around the back for deliveries. But he pointed a thick finger at Arthur. He needs to leave, now. We are not a delivery, I said, my voice projecting clearly across the lobby. I channeled every ounce of my corporate authority. I am Melina Hawthorne. I have a 9 o'clock meeting with Elias Thorne regarding the Hawthorne estate and Vanguard. Heavy Industries. This is my associate. Kowalski looked at Arthur, who was currently picking a piece of dried mud off his sleeve. Your associate, ma'am. This is a homeless person. We have a strict no-soliciting policy. He is a health hazard. He is a witness, I lied smoothly. And he is my consultant on structural integrity matters related to the patent in question. I don't care if he's the Pope, Kowalski said, stepping into my personal space. He is not coming up. Look at him. He's dripping on the marble. You can go up if you have an appointment. But he stays here, or I'm calling the police for trespassing. I felt Arthur tense beside me, but I placed a hand on his arm to steady him. I looked Kowalski dead in the eye. I did not blink. Officer Kowalski, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. Are you familiar with the Americans with Disabilities Act, specifically regarding the accompaniment of support personnel for individuals undergoing acute emotional distress during legal proceedings? Kowalski blinked. What? I am currently in a state of bereavement, I continued, making up the legal argument as I went, but delivering it with the conviction of a Supreme Court justice. This man is my emotional support companion. Furthermore, under the New York City human rights law, denying entry to a frantic party based on appearance or economic status in a place of public accommodation, which this lobby is classified as during business hours, can be construed as discriminatory harassment. Do you really want to explain to Elias Thorne, a senior partner in this building, why you caused his client to miss a multi-million-dollar closing because you were worried about a little mud on your floor? I took a step forward, forcing him to step back. Mr. Thorne is billing $500 an hour for this meeting, I added. If I am late, I will advise him to deduct the lost time from the building's security contract. Shall I call him down here to adjudicate this? Kowalski hesitated. He looked at me, seeing the expensive cut of my suit beneath the mud. He looked at Arthur, who was now gazing at the ceiling with an air of vacant innocence. He looked at the other guard, who shrugged. The threat of Elias Thorne was the key. Everyone in this building feared the lawyers on the 50th floor. Fine, Kowalski grunted, stepping aside. But if he touches anything, or if he harasses anyone, I am dragging him out myself, and you are paying for the cleaning crew. Send the bill to the estate, I said coldly. I marched past him toward the elevators. Arthur fell into step beside me. As we passed the guard, Arthur offered him a polite nod. Lovely morning for it, isn't it? He rasped. Kowalski just glared. We reached the elevator bank. I pressed the button for the 50th floor. The doors slid open, revealing a mirrored interior. We stepped inside, and the doors closed, sealing us in a box of silence. As the elevator began its smooth, rapid ascent, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. I looked at our reflections in the mirrored walls. We looked insane. A mud-spattered executive and a beggar. Arthur was not looking at the mirror. He was looking at the control panel. He ran a dirty finger along the seam where the brass met the wood paneling. So, Arthur said, breaking the silence. Bianca, that is the name of the dragon we are going to slay. Step-dragon, I corrected, staring at the floor numbers ticking upward. 10, 20. My stepmother's daughter. She is not a dragon. Dragons are majestic. She is a leech, a very well-dressed, very expensive leech. And she is selling your father's work. She is trying to, I said. She thinks she owns it. She thinks because she lived in his house and spent his money, she owns his mind. Arthur hummed, a low sound in his throat. Greed makes people stupid. It makes them blind. She probably thinks she has won already. She has, I said. In her mind, the victory lap started yesterday. I watched him in the reflection. Most people, especially those who had been living on the street, would be intimidated by this elevator. They would be looking at their shoes, or shrinking into the corner, overwhelmed by the opulence. But Arthur was standing in the center of the car, his feet planted wide. He was not cowering. He was inspecting. He looked up at the ceiling vent. He frowned. Dust, he muttered. The filtration system on this bank is overdue for a filter change. I can hear the fan rattling. It is off balance. I turned to look at him. You can hear the fan. I hear everything. Melina, he said, tapping his ear. Buildings talk. If you listen, this one is complaining about maintenance cuts. He looked at me then, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward. It was a cryptic, knowing look, as if he knew a secret about the building that I did not. It was unnerving. For a second, the beggar vanished, and I saw a man who was used to giving orders, not taking them. You are a strange man. Arthur, I said. I am just an observant one, he replied. Now, look at me. Do I look like a terrifying legal consultant? I examined him. His coat was a disaster. His beard was wild, but his shirt, the bottom layer of flannel, had a collar. It was frayed, but it was there. And around his neck, he had tied a piece of dirty black cloth, presumably to keep out the cold. You look like a disaster, I said honestly. But we can improve the silhouette. I reached out. He did not flinch. I took the strip of black cloth around his neck. It was greasy, but I ignored the texture. I undid the crude knot he had made. Stand still, I commanded softly. I looped the cloth around his neck, treating it like the silk ties I used to buy for my father. I measured the length. I crossed the wide end over the narrow end. I brought it up and through the loop. Arthur watched my hands. He stood perfectly still, his breathing steady. A Windsor knot, he asked quietly. A half Windsor, I corrected. Tightening the knot and sliding it up to his neck, I smoothed the collar of his flannel shirt over it. It is less formal, but given the circumstances, I think we can get away with it. I stepped back to admire my handiwork. The rag now looked, from a distance, like a black cravat. It gave him a rakish, eccentric look. "There," I said. "Now you look less like a beggar and more like an eccentric genius who lost his luggage." Arthur looked in the mirror. He touched the knot I had made. His eyes softened, and for a moment, the sharp, hawk-like intensity faded into something sadder, something more human. "Thank you," he said. "It has been a long time since anyone fixed my tie." "Don't get used to it," I said, masking my own emotion. "It is just camouflage." The elevator slowed. The sensation of gravity returned as we decelerated. The digital display flashed 50. "Showtime," Arthur whispered. "Remember," I said, gripping the handle of my briefcase until my knuckles ached. "You are the distraction. I am the blade." "I will be the chaos," Arthur promised. "You be the order." The doors slid open with a soft chime. We stepped out onto the VIP floor. The carpet was thick enough to swallow our feet. The walls were lined with original abstract art. Directly ahead of us, past a reception desk that was currently empty, stood the double glass doors of the main conference room. Through the glass, I could see them. They were all there. Bianca, sitting at the head of the table, laughing at something Elias was saying. My stepmother, checking her makeup in a compact mirror. And two men in gray suits I did not recognize the buyers from Vanguard. They looked happy. They looked triumphant. I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was not the hot, burning anger of the morning. It was the cold, calculating focus of a sniper. "Ready?" I asked Arthur. He straightened his back, pulling his tattered coat around him like a royal robe. "After you, madam," he said. We walked toward the glass doors. I did not knock. I did not pause. I reached out, grabbed the handle, and threw the door open. Just outside the heavy double doors of the conference room, Arthur had grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. He pointed to a courtesy wheelchair folded against the marble wall, likely left there for elderly clients who found the walk from the elevator too taxing. "The leg," he had whispered, winking. "Let us dial up the tragedy. Shall we?" He collapsed into the chair, slumping his body until he looked half his size. A pile of wet rags and misery. I took the handles. It was the perfect prop. It transformed us from intruders into a spectacle of pity. I kicked the door open. The conversation inside died instantly. It did not taper off. It was severed. The room was vast, dominated by a long, boat-shaped table made of polished mahogany that gleamed under the recessed lighting. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was breathtaking, a panoramic sweep of the Manhattan skyline that screamed power and dominance. But the air inside was stagnant, recycled, and thick with the smell of expensive coffee and deceit. 5 faces turned toward us. At the far end sat Bianca. She was wearing a white dress, pristine and sharp, looking like a bride waiting for her groom. Next to her was my stepmother, Elena, draped in black silk that cost more than my car, her face a mask of carefully applied grief. To their right sat Elias Thorne, his bald head shining under the lights, his hand hovering over a stack of documents, and across from them were 2 men in gray suits, the buyers from Vanguard, who looked up from their tablets with expressions of mild annoyance. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the smell hit them. The earthy, rot-tinged stench of the construction site mud that coated my shoes and Arthur's coat drifted into the climate-controlled perfection of the room. Bianca's nose wrinkled. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Oh my God!" she shrieked, her voice pitching up into a register of pure incredulity. "Melina, is that you?" She stared at my ruined suit, then her eyes dropped to the wheelchair. She looked at Arthur, who was currently drooling slightly, his head lolling to the side in a masterclass of feigned senility. Bianca burst out laughing. It was a cruel, barking sound. "You have got to be kidding me. You are actually desperate enough to bring a homeless person to a legal proceeding. Did you pick him up from the gutter to beg for spare change?" Elias Thorne did not laugh. He stood up slowly, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He looked like a bulldog that had just found a cat in his food bowl. "Ms. Hawthorne," Elias boomed, pointing a pen at me like a weapon. "This is a private meeting. Remove that filth from my conference room immediately. Security." "Security let us up," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the hysteria. I did not stop moving. I pushed the wheelchair forward, the rubber tires squeaking on the parquet floor. I navigated past the stunned Vanguard executives, past Elias, and parked Arthur directly at the head of the table, the empty spot reserved for the chairman. The symbolism was violent. I had just placed a beggar in the king's throne. "Get him out!" Elias shouted, reaching for the phone on the console. "This is trespassing. This is a health code violation." "He is my witness advisor," I announced, placing my hands on the back of the wheelchair and staring Elias down. "Under the terms of the probate hearing, I am allowed to bring counsel or support representative of my choosing. Arthur is my choice." "He is a bum," Bianca yelled, walking around the table to stand next to Elias. "Look at him. He is leaking mud onto the carpet, Mom. Tell her." My stepmother, Elena, looked at me with sad, disappointed eyes, the look she had perfected over 20 years of passive-aggressive manipulation. She dabbed her dry eyes with a tissue. "Melina, honey," she said, her voice dripping with fake syrup. "We know you are grieving. We know you are not entirely stable right now. But this is a cry for help. Please, let Elias call the hospital. You need rest." "I do not need rest, Elena," I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out the wet, crumpled bank statements I had printed at the motel. I slapped them onto the table. They landed with a wet thud. "I need answers," Arthur let out a loud, hacking cough that sounded like a wet engine trying to turn over. He shook violently in the chair, his hands grasping for the crystal pitcher of water in the center of the table. "Thirsty," he croaked. "Water." The Vanguard executive on the left recoiled, pulling his expensive suit jacket away from Arthur's reaching hand. "For God's sake," Elias hissed. He grabbed a plastic cup from the side console, filled it with water, and slammed it down in front of Arthur. "Drink it and shut up." Arthur took the cup with trembling hands. He spilled half of it down his front, the water mixing with the mud on his coat to create a slurry that dripped onto the mahogany table. Bianca looked like she was going to vomit. "This is disgusting. Melina, sign the papers and get out. I cannot breathe in here with him." Elias took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. He tried to regain control of the room. He turned to the Vanguard buyers. "Gentlemen, my apologies. As you can see, the deceased's daughter is taking the loss very hard. She is acting out. We can conclude this quickly." He slid a thick document toward me. It was bound in blue leather. "The settlement agreement," Elias said, his voice dropping to a smooth, professional purr. "As we discussed, Melina, the estate is complex. There are debts, significant debts your father incurred during his illness. However, out of the goodness of their hearts, Elena and Bianca have agreed to a settlement." He pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. "We are offering you a one-time payment of $10,000. Elias said, "Cash, today. It will cover your relocation expenses, and perhaps a new suit." $10,000, I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. I was not trembling from fear. I was trembling from the sheer effort of not reaching across the table and strangling him. "My father built this company from a garage in Queens. He has patents in 12 countries. And you are telling me the estate is worth $10,000? "The market has been unkind." Elena sighed, examining her manicure. "And medical bills are so expensive. Darling, we are just trying to help you. If you do not sign, the creditors will take everything, and you will get nothing. We are protecting you." "Protecting me?" I whispered. I looked at Arthur. He was staring into his empty plastic cup, rocking back and forth. He looked completely checked out. I looked at the Vanguard buyers. "And you gentlemen, you are buying the company. How much are you paying for this debt-ridden estate?" The lead buyer. A man with steel gray hair and a watch that cost more than a house. Cleared his throat. He looked uncomfortable. That is confidential. Ms. Hawthorne, we are acquiring the assets and liabilities. It is a standard acquisition. $5 million, Arthur mumbled. The room froze. Elias whipped his head around. What did you say? Arthur looked up. His blue eyes were watery and unfocused. He wiped his mouth with his dirty sleeve. 5 million? That is the number. Isn't it? I saw it on the paper in the trash. Bianca laughed nervously. He is delirious. He is hallucinating numbers. But I saw the flicker in the buyer's eyes. Arthur had guessed correctly. Or rather, he had remembered what I told him in the elevator. But to them, it was a lucky guess from a senile old man. I decided to play the fool. I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at the table, letting the defeat radiate off me. Is it true? I asked softly, looking at Bianca. Are you selling Daddy's company? It is none of your business, Bianca snapped. But yes, we are selling, we are liquidating, we are moving on. And you should too. Sign the paper. Melina, take the $10,000, go back to your little apartment and your sad little life. Do not make this harder than it has to be. I reached out and touched the pen Elias was holding out to me. My hand shook. And the journals? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The technical drawings, the patents, what happens to them? Assets, Elias said quickly. They are part of the intellectual property transfer. Vanguard acquires all rights to past, present, and future technologies developed by Robert Hawthorne. I looked at the Vanguard buyer. So, you are buying the concrete compression patent, the Atlas project. The buyer nodded. It is the centerpiece of the acquisition. Without it, the deal would be significantly less attractive. Meaningless, the other buyer muttered. It would be meaningless without the patent. Right, I said. So the patent is the key. Melina, stop stalling. Bianca slammed her hand on the table. Who cares about the stupid concrete sign, the damn paper? I have a flight to Paris tonight. Paris, I said. With the $5 million. Yes, with the $5 million. Bianca screamed, losing her composure completely. It is my money. It is my inheritance. He was my father, too. He was your stepfather, I corrected gently. And he never adopted you. He loved me more. Bianca spat, her face twisting into an ugly mask of entitlement. He knew you were a bore, a stiff. That is why he left it all to me. Now sign. I looked at Elias. So, just to be clear, Mr. Thorne, if I sign this, I am waiving my rights to contest the will, and I am acknowledging that Bianca and Elena are the sole legal owners of the patent, which they are then selling to Vanguard. Precisely, Elias said, thrusting the pen into my hand. It is a standard waiver. It protects everyone. Sign it. Melina, be a good girl for once. I held the pen. The room was silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear the rapid breathing of my stepmother. I looked at Arthur. He had stopped rocking. He was sitting perfectly still. He was not looking at his cup anymore. He was looking at Elias Thorne, and under the grime and the beard, a smile was forming. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. Standard waiver, Arthur repeated. His voice was no longer a croak. It was clear. It was resonant. It was the voice of a man who was used to commanding courtrooms. Elias frowned, looking at the beggar with sudden confusion. What? I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the mahogany table. I don't think I will sign, I said, my voice hardening into steel. Because you cannot sell what you do not own. Excuse me, Elias laughed, but it was a nervous sound. We have the will. We have the probate order. You have a forged will, I said, standing up, and you have a fraudulent transfer. I reached into my blazer pocket, right over my heart, and pulled out the silver USB drive. I held it up. It caught the light from the chandelier. What is that? Bianca asked, squinting. This, I said. is the keystone, and it is about to bring your entire house of cards crashing down. Security! Elias roared, slamming his fist on the table. Get them out now. I wouldn't do that, Arthur said. He did not shout. He did not scream. He simply spoke with an authority so absolute that it sucked the air out of the room. Arthur slowly pushed the wheelchair back. He stood up. He did not struggle. He did not wobble. He stood up straight, unfolding his full height, towering over the seated executives. He reached up and adjusted the rag I had tied around his neck. Centering the knot, he looked at the Vanguard buyers. Gentlemen, Arthur said, his diction crisp and cultured, I believe your due diligence might have been incomplete. Elias stared at him, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color was draining from his face so fast, it looked like he was bleeding out. Who are you? Elias whispered. Arthur smiled. Oh, Elias, you really don't recognize me without my gavel. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hovering at the top of its arc, waiting to drop. The silence that had fallen over the room following Arthur's cryptic question was heavy. But it was fragile. It was the kind of silence that exists right before a dam breaks. Elias Thorne was staring at Arthur, his eyes narrowing as he tried to reconcile the image of the mud-spattered, bearded wretch standing before him with the terrifying memory of a man he had not seen in a decade. But denial is a powerful drug, and Elias was overdosing on it. He blinked, shook his head as if to clear a hallucination, and decided that the man in front of him was simply a lunatic who had perhaps watched too much court TV. Sit down, Elias hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and unease. Sit down before I have security throw you through that window. Arthur did not sit. He leaned against the edge of the mahogany table, crossing his arms over his tattered coat. He looked like a king in exile, amused by the court jester. Bianca, however, had no patience for psychological warfare. She was checking her phone again, watching the time tick away. To her, this was not a legal battle. It was a transaction that was taking too long. She stood up, smoothing the front of her white dress, and glared at me with pure venom. I am done with this circus, Bianca announced, her voice shrill. Elias, stop playing with them. Melina, listen to me very carefully because I am only going to say this once. You are going to sign that waiver, and you are going to do it right now. Or what? I asked, my voice calm. I was already reaching for the HDMI cable that coiled in the center of the conference table like a black snake. Or you will find out that there is nothing left to fight for, Bianca sneered. She walked over to the window, looking out at the city she believed she owned. I have already sold it. Melina, the deal is done. The contracts were pre-signed pending the probate release. The moment you scribble your name on that line, $5 million hits an account in the Cayman Islands. It is over. You are fighting for a corpse. $5 million, I repeated, letting the number hang in the air. For Hawthorne Engineering, for 30 years of Dad's work. It is a fair price for a failing company, Elias interjected smoothly, regaining his composure now that the conversation was back to numbers. The liabilities are significant. The brand is tarnished. We are lucky Vanguard is willing to pay that much for scrap. I looked at the two Vanguard executives. They were watching the exchange with impassive faces, but I saw the sheen of sweat on the forehead of the younger one. They knew. They knew exactly what they were stealing. And the Atlas project? I asked. The concrete compression patent. Is that scrap too? Elias laughed. It was a dismissive, ugly sound. Atlas. That pipe dream. Your father was losing his mind at the end. Melina. He was scribbling nonsense in notebooks. The engineers at Vanguard reviewed the preliminary data. It is unworkable. It is theoretical garbage. We valued the patent at 0. We are only taking it to prevent future litigation. 0, I said. So you are telling me that Vanguard Heavy Industries, the largest construction conglomerate on the East Coast, is paying $5 million for a brand name and some office furniture, and they consider the revolutionary technology that solves the moisture density problem in high-rise foundations to be trash. Trash, Elias confirmed. Leaning forward. Worthless. Now sign. That is curious, a raspy voice cut in. Arthur pushed himself off the table. He limped a few steps toward the Vanguard executives. He did not look at Elias. He looked directly at the senior buyer, a man named Mr. Henderson. If the Atlas patent is trash, Arthur said, tilting his head, then why did the internal risk assessment report submitted to the Vanguard Board of Directors last Thursday classify it as a Category Alpha asset with a projected revenue stream of $200 million over the next 5 years? The room went deathly still. Mr. Henderson choked on his water. He set the glass down hard, water sloshing onto the table. Excuse me, Elias turned purple. What are you talking about, you old fool? What do you know about Vanguard's internal reports? Arthur ignored Elias. He kept his eyes locked on Henderson. I believe the exact phrasing in the executive summary was disruptive technology essential for maintaining market dominance in the tri-state area, and the recommendation was to acquire it at any cost, preferably before the heir realizes its value. Is that not correct, Mr. Henderson? Henderson looked terrified. He looked at Elias, then at Bianca, then back at the beggar who was quoting confidential board minutes. I do not know where you are getting this information. Shut up, Elias roared. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Shut up, you dirty old man. You are delirious. You are making things up. Am I? Arthur asked softly. Security, Elias screamed at the intercom. Get in here now. No need for security, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. Let us look at the evidence. I plugged the HDMI cable into my laptop. The massive 80-inch monitor on the wall behind Elias flickered to life. It mirrored my desktop. The background was a photo of my father and me at a construction site, smiling, wearing hard hats. It was a stark reminder of who was really in the room. Melina, what are you doing? Bianca demanded, stepping back. Unplug that. You called my father's work trash, I said, typing my password. Compliance 101. Let us see what your bank account says. I opened the first file. It was the spreadsheet I had compiled at the motel. The rows and columns were color-coded, bright and damning on the giant screen. This, I said. Using a laser pointer I pulled from my pocket to circle a cluster of transactions, is a summary of withdrawals from the Hawthorne Estate operating account over the last 6 months, $250,000, all sent to a single entity. I clicked to the next slide. Sterling Solutions, LLC, I read. A company with no employees, no office, and no product, just a mailbox in Delaware. Bianca's face went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I clicked again. And here we have the cross-referenced social media posts, I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. Every time money went to Sterling Solutions, Bianca Hawthorne posted a photo of a new luxury purchase. The dates match perfectly. June 3rd, $15,000. June 5th, Cartier bracelet. August 12th, $30,000. August 14th, Turks and Caicos Resort Suite. You are lying, Bianca shrieked. That is circumstantial. You cannot prove that is my company. I don't have to, I said, because you made a mistake. Bianca, you paid the annual registration fee for the LLC using your personal credit card, the one linked to the family trust. I pulled up the credit card statement on the screen. There it was, highlighted in yellow. Delaware Division of Corporations. Payment for Sterling Solutions, LLC. That, I said, looking at Elias, is embezzlement. It is fraud. And since you used wire transfers across state lines to move the money, it is federal wire fraud. That is 20 years in prison. Bianca, per count. Elias was sweating profusely now. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and mopped his bald head. "This is obtained illegally," he stammered. "You hacked her accounts. This is inadmissible." "I am the executor of the estate under the original will," I said. "I have access to all family accounts. I did not hack anything. I just audited the books." I turned to the Vanguard buyers. They were packing their briefcases with frantic speed. "Sit down," I commanded. They froze. "I am not done," I said. "Now, let us talk about the sale. You claim the patent is worthless. Elias claims it is trash." I opened the email archive. I pulled up the email thread between Elias and the Vanguard CEO. Subject Project Atlas Acquisition. From Elias Thorne to CEO. Vanguard. Heavy Industries. Date January 10th, 2026. Message. The girl is clueless. She has no idea what the compression tech is worth. We can get it for $5 million. I will structure the deal so the patent is bundled with the liabilities. Once the transfer is complete, we can license it back to the subsidiary for $50 million a year. My fee for facilitating this will be the standard 10%. I read the last line out loud. My fee for facilitating this will be the standard 10%. I looked at Elias. $500,000. That is your price. Elias. You sold your soul and my father's legacy for the price of a studio apartment in Manhattan. Elias collapsed into his chair. He looked small. He looked defeated. But Bianca was not defeated. She was cornered, and cornered animals bite. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing at my laptop. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" I pulled the laptop back easily. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Bianca spun around, her eyes wild. She looked at Elias. "Do something. She hacked us. She is lying. Call the police. Tell them she broke into the system. Tell them she is harassing us." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You think you are so smart? You are a criminal, Melina. You invaded my privacy. I will have you arrested. I will sue you until you are begging on the street with your boyfriend there." She gestured violently at Arthur. "Officer!" Bianca screamed at the door, where the 2 security guards were now standing, looking unsure of what to do. "Arrest her! She is stealing corporate data. She is a hacker." Elias seemed to find his spine. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, trying to salvage the situation with bluster. "She is right," Elias said, his voice regaining some of its courtroom boom. "This is an unauthorized access of privileged attorney-client communications. Ms. Hawthorne, you have just committed a felony in front of witnesses, officers. Take her into custody and seize that laptop. It is evidence of a crime." The guard stepped forward. Kowalski, the one who had stopped us in the lobby, looked at me with a mixture of apology and duty. "Ma'am, I am going to have to ask you to close the computer and come with us." "I am not going anywhere," I said, my hand hovering over the send button on my screen. "I have already forwarded this entire file to the district attorney's office, and the SEC." "You are bluffing," Elias sneered. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," I said. "Arrest her," Bianca screamed, stomping her foot like a child. "And get that smelly old man out of here." One of the guards reached for my arm. The other moved toward Arthur, reaching for the wheelchair. "Sir, you need to leave," the guard said to Arthur. Arthur did not move. He did not look at the guard. He looked at Elias. He looked at the Vanguard buyers. He looked at Bianca. And then he laughed. It was not the wheezing laugh of a sick man. It was a deep, resonant, powerful laugh that shook the room. He reached up and untied the rag around his neck. He tossed it onto the table. It landed on top of the settlement agreement. "You know," Arthur said, his voice filling the room without any effort, "I have seen many stupid criminals in my life. I have seen clumsy ones. I have seen desperate ones. But you 4. He stood up from the wheelchair. This time, he did not just stand. He rose. He seemed to grow 6 inches. His posture straightened. The slump of the beggar vanished. replaced by the rigid, commanding stance of a man who had spent his life judging others. He brushed the mud from his coat as if it were ermine. "You are the most spectacularly incompetent conspirators I have ever had the displeasure of witnessing," Arthur said. "Sit down, old man," Elias shouted, but his voice cracked. Arthur turned his head slowly. The blue eyes were blazing now. They were not the eyes of a friend. They were the eyes of the law. "I do not think I will," Arthur said, "and I do not think you will be giving any more orders in this building, Mr. Thorne." "And why is that?" Elias challenged. Though he was backing away, Arthur reached into the deep pocket of his filthy coat. The guards tensed, hands going to their belts, but Arthur did not pull out a weapon. He pulled out a badge. It was not a police badge. It was a gold badge, encased in leather, and next to it, he pulled out an ID card on a lanyard. He threw them onto the table. They slid across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of Elias. Elias looked down. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched his eyes bulge. I watched his knees give way, and he slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "Read it," Arthur commanded. "Read it out loud so everyone knows who you just tried to throw out of his own building." Elias swallowed. He could barely speak. "Chairman," Elias whispered. "Chairman of the board, founding partner, Arthur Pendleton." Arthur Pendleton. The name hit the room like a physical shockwave. Bianca stopped screaming. The Vanguard buyers looked like they wanted to dissolve into the carpet. Arthur Pendleton was a legend. He was the former Supreme Court Justice who had retired to found the Vanguard Law Group. He was the silent majority shareholder of Vanguard Heavy Industries. He was the man who built this building. He was the man whose name was on the letterhead Elias used every day. And he was the man I had pulled out of the mud. Arthur looked at me and winked. "I told you," he said. "I have a bit of history with this place." The chaos in the conference room was a physical force. A swirling vortex of shouting voices and grabbing hands. The security guard, Kowalski, had his heavy hand clamped on my shoulder, his grip tightening as he prepared to drag me away from my laptop. The other guard was reaching for the wheelchair, his fingers digging into the fabric of the filthy coat, ready to haul the old man out like a sack of refuse. Bianca was screaming, her face twisted into a mask of triumphant malice, while Elias Thorne was hyperventilating, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get them out!" Elias shrieked, his voice cracking. "Throw them in the street!" "Come on, lady," Kowalski grunted in my ear. "Don't make this hard." I struggled, planting my feet. "I am not leaving without that hard drive. It is evidence. It is stolen property," Bianca yelled. "Take it. Smash it." The guard pulling at the wheelchair gave a sharp yank. "Up you get. Pops, party is over." That was the moment the world stopped. It did not stop because of a shout. It stopped because of a sound so sharp, so violent, and so authoritative that it cut through the hysteria like a gunshot. Bam! A hand weathered, scarred, but rock-steady slammed down onto the polished mahogany table. It hit with such force that the crystal water pitcher jumped, splashing water onto the legal documents. "I said," a voice boomed, deep and resonant, vibrating in the chest of every person in the room. "Stop." The guard holding the wheelchair froze. Kowalski loosened his grip on my shoulder. We all turned. Arthur was standing. He was not just standing. He was towering. The stoop of the beggar, the curvature of the spine that spoke of defeat and cold nights on park benches, was gone. In its place was a posture of military precision. He stood with his shoulders squared, his chin raised, occupying the space with the kind of gravity that bends light around it. He reached up with a slow, deliberate movement and pulled the dirty knit beanie from his head. He dropped it onto the table next to the badge he had thrown moments earlier. Underneath the cap, his hair was a shock of silver, thick and swept back, revealing a high, intelligent forehead and a face that I suddenly realized I had seen before. I had seen it in oil paintings in law libraries. I had seen it on the news during landmark rulings. I had seen it in the history books of American jurisprudence. The grime was still there. The beard was still wild. The coat was still smelling of wet dog and construction mud. But none of that mattered anymore. The man wearing the rags was no longer a beggar. He was a titan. He looked at the guard holding his coat. "Unhand me, son," Arthur said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a sounding block. "Unless you wish to explain to your supervisor why you just assaulted the owner of this building." The guard released him instantly, stepping back as if burned. Arthur turned his gaze to Elias Thorne. Elias was slumped in his chair, his skin the color of old parchment. He was staring at the gold badge on the table, then up at Arthur's face, his eyes darting back and forth in a frantic attempt to deny the reality that was crushing him. It cannot be," Elias whispered, his voice barely audible. "You are in the Hamptons. You are retired. You are—" "I am right here, Elias," Arthur said, his voice cold as liquid nitrogen. "Watching you sell my firm's integrity for a 10% commission." Elias made a sound that was half sob, half choke. He scrambled to stand up, his legs shaking so badly he knocked his chair over. It clattered loudly to the floor. "Mr. Justice?" Elias stammered, bowing his head, his hands fluttering uselessly. "Your Honor, Mr. Chairman, I had no idea. I thought the security, the disguise." "Justice Arthur Pendleton," the Vanguard buyer, Mr. Henderson, breathed out, looking like he was about to faint. He immediately stood up and buttoned his jacket, looking for the nearest exit. "Oh my God, it is him. It is actually him." "Sit down, Henderson," Arthur commanded without looking at him. Henderson sat. Immediately, the room was paralyzed. The realization washed over me like a tidal wave. Arthur, the man I had pulled out of the mud, the man I had defended against a security guard, the man whose tie I had fixed in the elevator. He was Arthur Pendleton, the former Supreme Court Justice, the founder of the Vanguard Law Group. A man known as the Iron Gavel for his ruthless adherence to ethics and his destruction of corruption. He was the most powerful man in the legal world of New York City, and he was standing at the head of the table covered in muck. Bianca looked around, confused. The name clearly meant nothing to her shallow mind. She only saw the reaction of the powerful men around her. "Who cares who he is?" Bianca snapped, though her voice wavered. "He is still a bum. Look at him. He ruined the carpet, Elias. Why are you bowing to him?" Arthur turned his head slowly to look at Bianca. The movement was predatory. "Young woman," Arthur said, "I suggest you be silent. You have already spoken enough to indict yourself 3 times over." He walked around the table. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the squelch of his wet shoes on the expensive carpet. He stopped in front of the Vanguard executives. "You reported to the board that the Hawthorne patent was a Category Alpha asset," Arthur said to Henderson, "and yet you sit here, conspiring with a corrupt attorney to purchase it for pennies on the dollar, knowing full well that the true value belongs to the daughter, not the estate. Is that how Vanguard Heavy Industries does business now? Is that the legacy I built?" "Sir, we were just following the lead of the estate's counsel," Henderson stuttered, sweating profusely. "Mr. Thorne assured us the valuation was legitimate." "Mr. Thorne," Arthur said, turning back to Elias, "is a disgrace to the profession." Elias flinched. "I founded this firm 40 years ago on a bedrock of honor," Arthur continued, his voice rising, filling the room with righteous anger. "I stepped down from the bench to ensure that justice was served not just in the courts, but in the boardroom. But lately, I have been hearing whispers that my firm had become a slaughterhouse for the innocent, that we were helping predators strip mine families in their darkest hours." He paced the room, his tattered coat flowing behind him like judicial robes. "So, I decided to see for myself," Arthur said. "I decided to take a walk. I put on these clothes. I walked the streets around my own building. I wanted to see who we were when we thought no one was watching. I wanted to see if anyone in this city still possessed a shred of humanity." He stopped and pointed a muddy finger at the window. "I fell," Arthur said softly. Down there on the pavement, I fell in the mud. Hundreds of people walked past me. My own employees, my own partners, men I have hired, men I have promoted. They stepped over me. They kicked my papers. They looked at me with disgust because I was an inconvenience to their morning commute. He turned to me, his eyes softened, the fierce blue turning warm. And then, he said, she stopped. All eyes turned to me. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. She did not know who I was, Arthur said. To her, I was just a piece of trash blocking her path. She was on her way to the most important meeting of her life. She was fighting for her father's legacy. She had every reason to walk past, but she didn't. He walked over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and reassuring. She ruined a $3,000 suit to help an old man stand up, Arthur said. She wiped the mud from my face. She treated me with dignity. She offered me her arm and walked me through the front door of the lion's den because she refused to let me be humiliated. Arthur looked at Elias, his eyes hardening again. That, Elias, is what we call character, Arthur spat. It is a currency you have been bankrupt in for a very long time. Elias was weeping now, silent, terrified tears. Mr. Chairman, please, I have served this firm for 20 years. It was a lapse in judgment. I can explain. There is nothing to explain, Arthur said. I heard the recording. I heard you admit to the $500,000 kickback. I heard you collude to defraud this young woman. You are done. Elias, you are finished. Bianca finally seemed to grasp the gravity of the situation. Her survival instinct kicked in. She dropped the angry facade and instantly morphed into the victim. Her face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes, the same performance she had given on the live stream earlier. Oh, sir, Bianca cried, stepping forward, her hands clasped. I had no idea. If I had known it was you, if I had known you were a judge, I would never have spoken like that. I was just stressed. I'm grieving my father. Please. You have to understand. I am just a girl trying to manage a difficult estate. She reached out to touch his arm, trying to use her charm. The weapon that had worked on every man she had ever met. Arthur stepped back. He looked at her hand as if it were a poisonous snake. Do not touch me, he said. Bianca froze. Arthur leaned in close to her. You say that if you had known who I was, you would have treated me differently. Yes, of course, Bianca sobbed. I have the utmost respect for the law. I would have helped you. I swear. Arthur laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. That is exactly the point. My dear, Arthur said, you treat people with respect only when you think they have power. You treat them with kindness only when you think they can do something for you. When you looked at me, you saw a beggar. You saw zero value. So you treated me like garbage. He straightened up, looking down at her with pure disdain. You do not need to know who a man is to know he is a human being. Arthur said, the way you treat a beggar tells me everything I need to know about how you would run a company. You have no honor, you have no empathy, and you have absolutely no business touching Robert Hawthorne's legacy. Robert, I whispered. You knew my father. Arthur turned to me. A sad smile touched his lips. Melina, he said gently, who do you think funded the initial research for the compression project 10 years ago? Who do you think protected your father when the sharks on Wall Street tried to short sell his stock in 2018? My mouth fell open. The anonymous angel investor, the silent partner he used to talk about. Robert was a good man, Arthur said. He was a stubborn, brilliant, honest engineer. We met at a coffee shop in Queens 30 years ago. He fixed my table with a matchbook, and we started talking about load-bearing walls. He was the only man I knew who cared more about the safety of the concrete than the profit margin of the project. Arthur's eyes misted over slightly. When he got sick, he wrote to me. He told me he was worried about you. He told me he was worried about them. He gestured to Bianca and Elias. He told me he had hidden the assignment of the patent. He asked me to watch over you if things got bad. So the meeting in the street, I started. I was coming to the meeting anyway, Arthur admitted. I was going to storm in here and stop this sale. But when I saw you on the sidewalk, I wanted to see if Robert's daughter had his steel. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up his muddy face. You do, Arthur said. You have his steel, and you have his heart. He turned back to the table. He picked up the phone Elias had used to call security. He punched a single button. This is Pendleton, Arthur said into the receiver. Connect me to the FBI field office. Special Agent Miller. Yes, I will hold. He looked at Elias, who was now shaking so hard his teeth were chattering. And send a team from internal auditing up to conference room B, Arthur added. And the ethics committee, and the police. We have a wire fraud in progress. He hung up the phone. Bianca sank into her chair, her face gray. But the money, the $5 million. There is no money, Bianca, Arthur said. The transfer is blocked. I own the bank, too. He turned to the security guards, who were standing at attention, looking terrified. Gentlemen, Arthur said, you may escort Mr. Thorne and Miss Hawthorne to the waiting area. Do not let them leave the building. If they try to leave, arrest them for attempted grand larceny. Yes, sir, right away. Mr. Chairman, Kowalski shouted, grabbing Elias by the arm with significantly less gentleness than before. Melina, Bianca screamed as the guard grabbed her elbow. Melina, tell him, we are family. You can't let them arrest me. I am your sister. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had thrown my father's journals in the trash. I looked at the woman who had tried to sell his life's work for a vacation in Paris. Family, I said quietly. Family doesn't leave family in the mud. Bianca. I turned my back on her. Get them out of my sight, Arthur commanded. As the doors closed on Bianca's screaming and Elias's sobbing, the room fell silent again. But this time, it was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of a storm that had finally broken. Arthur sighed, a long, weary sound. He slumped slightly, the adrenaline fading, revealing the tired old man beneath the Titan. He looked at his dirty coat. He looked at the mud on the table. Well, Arthur said, looking at me with a twinkle in his eye, that was dramatic. I hope I didn't overdo it. I looked at him, tears finally spilling over my lashes. I didn't care about the suit. I didn't care about the mud. I walked over and hugged the filthy, smelly, wonderful old man. Thank you, I whispered into his coat. Thank you, Arthur patted my back awkwardly. Don't thank me, kid. Thank your dad. He picked the right daughter. He pulled back and looked at me seriously. Now, Arthur said, we have a lot of work to do. This firm is a mess. That patent needs to be protected. And I believe you are currently unemployed. I wiped my eyes. Technically, yes. Good, Arthur said. Because I need a new director of compliance, someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty, and I think I found the only person in New York who qualifies. He pointed to my muddy shoes. You are hired, Arthur said. Start today. First assignment. Fire everyone who looked the other way. The room was still vibrating with the shock of Arthur Pendleton's revelation when he reached into the deep, grime-stained pocket of his coat. Everyone watched, perhaps expecting a weapon or another badge. Instead, he pulled out a sleek, matte black smartphone. It was the latest model, a device that cost more than the average monthly rent in this city, and it looked absurdly incongruous held in his dirt-caked hand. He did not look at the screen. He tapped a speed dial icon and held the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving Elias Thorne's terrified face. Christopher, Arthur said into the phone. His voice was calm, conversational, as if he were ordering a sandwich. It is Arthur. Yes, I am in the building. I am in conference room B. I need you to send the agents up now. Yes, the federal team. And Christopher, call the State Bar Association for me. Tell the chairman I am invoking Article 4 of the Ethics Charter. I want an immediate suspension of a license. Name is Elias Thorne, Thorne. Yes. Effective immediately. Thank you. He ended the call and placed the phone gently on the mahogany table. Elias let out a sound that was something between a whimper and a gasp. He slumped forward, his forehead hitting the polished wood. The fight had left him. He knew, as every lawyer in New York knew, that when Arthur Pendleton made a call, the earth moved. His career was not just over, it was being erased from existence in real time. "You cannot do this," Bianca whispered, her voice trembling. She was backing away toward the window, clutching her designer handbag as if it could shield her from the law. "I am an influencer. I have followers. You cannot just arrest me." Arthur turned to her. He did not yell. He simply reached into his other pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was old, yellowed at the edges, and covered in the dense, precise handwriting of a draftsman. "Do you know what this is, young lady?" Arthur asked. Bianca shook her head, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "This is the original trust agreement for Hawthorne Engineering," Arthur said. Unfolding the paper, "Your stepfather and I drafted this 20 years ago. He was the engineer, I was the legal architect, and right here, in Clause 17, there is a provision known as the Moral Turpitude and Honesty Clause." He tapped the paper with a muddy finger. "It states that any beneficiary who attempts to defraud the company, embezzle funds, or act in a manner that brings disrepute to the Hawthorne name, immediately forfeits all rights to the estate." Arthur read aloud. "Furthermore, it grants the trust protector, that is me, the absolute power of veto over any asset transfer if such misconduct is proven." He looked at Bianca, then at Elena. "You stole," Arthur said simply. "You lied. You created shell companies. You tried to sell a patent you did not own. By the power vested in me by this document, and by the laws of the state of New York, I hereby declare your inheritance null and void." "No," Elena shrieked, lurching forward. "You cannot. We have nothing else. The house is mortgaged. The credit cards are maxed out. We need that money." "You should have thought of that before you tried to rob an orphan," Arthur said coldly. At that moment, the double doors of the conference room burst open. It was not security this time. It was a phalanx of men and women in blue windbreakers emblazoned with the letters FBI and NYPD Economic Crimes Unit. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. "Bianca Hawthorne," a female agent barked. Spotting the woman in the white dress, Bianca froze. I. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion," the agent said, marching over to her. She spun Bianca around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final. Click, click. "Ow, you are hurting me," Bianca screamed, struggling. "My wrists. These are Cartier bracelets. You are scratching them." "You won't be needing jewelry where you are going," the agent said, guiding her forcefully toward the door. Another pair of officers hauled Elias Thorne out of his chair. He did not struggle. He was weeping openly, muttering about his pension, about his reputation. He looked like a man whose soul had been extracted, leaving only a hollow suit, the Vanguard buyers. Mr. Henderson and his associate were cowering in the corner, trying to look invisible. "Check their phones," Arthur commanded the agents, pointing at the buyers. "You will find evidence of collusion and insider trading. Book them." As the room cleared, filling with the chaotic noise of justice being served, only one person remained free: Elena. My stepmother stood in the center of the room, watching her daughter being dragged away. She looked around wild-eyed, and then her gaze landed on me. She rushed over, falling to her knees in front of me. She grabbed my hand, her long, manicured fingernails digging into my skin. The mud on my trousers stained her black silk dress, but she did not care. "Melina," she wailed. "Melina, please, you have to stop them. She is your sister. She is just a child. She didn't mean it." I looked down at her. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, cool emptiness. "She is 30 years old," Elena, I said. And she is not my sister. But what about me? Elena sobbed, clutching my leg. They are taking the house. They are taking everything. Where will I go? I am an old woman. Melina, I cannot live on the street. I took care of your father. You ignored my father, I corrected her, pulling my leg away. You went on cruises while he was dying. You complained about the smell of his medicine. You tried to charge me rent for keeping him alive. I reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the handkerchief I had used to wipe Arthur's face. Next to it, I felt the crinkle of a bill. I pulled it out. It was a $10 bill. I held it out to her. Here, I said. Elena stared at the money, her eyes wide with confusion. What is this? Bus fare, I said, my voice steady. And a little extra for a coffee. I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers. You have exactly 30 minutes to go back to the house and pack your things, I said, echoing the exact words Bianca had said to me 2 days ago. 30 minutes. Elena, if you are not out by the time I get there, I will have the police throw your belongings on the curb. Do not forget to leave the garage remote. She gaped at me, her mouth opening and closing. She looked for a trace of the submissive, quiet stepdaughter she had bullied for years. She found only the compliance officer. I dropped the bill. It fluttered down and landed on the expensive carpet. Elena scrambled for it, clutching the $10 like a lifeline. She scrambled to her feet and ran out of the room, sobbing, chasing after the officers who had taken her daughter. The room was quiet again. Arthur walked over to the window. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the skyline, his hands clasped behind his back. The mud on his coat had dried into a crust, but he still looked regal. You handled that well, Arthur said without turning around. Justice should be cold. Revenge is hot. But justice is a temperature that preserves. I learned from the best, I said, walking over to stand beside him. Arthur turned and looked at me. He studied my face. Then he looked down at my ruined suit. You know, he said, I was serious about the job offer. My director of risk control retired last month. He was soft. He let things slide. I need someone who spots the cracks in the foundation before the building falls down. I need someone who isn't afraid to walk into the mud. He extended a hand. It was clean now. The mud wiped away, but the calluses were still there. The salary is $300,000 a year, Arthur said, plus bonuses, and full equity partnership after 5 years. What do you say? Melina. I looked at his hand. I thought about my father's journals. I thought about the patent that was now safe. I thought about the long nights I had spent studying, working, fighting to be taken seriously in a world that wanted to dismiss me. I took his hand. His grip was warm and solid. I accept, I said. On one condition. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Oh, negotiating already. I want the first project to be the Atlas patent, I said. We build it. We don't sell it. We build it under the Hawthorne name. My father's name goes on every building that uses it. Arthur smiled. It was a wide, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Done, he said. Welcome to Vanguard. Partner. I walked out of the building 10 minutes later. The sun had finally broken through the gray clouds, bathing the plaza in a sharp, bright winter light. The air smelled of exhaust and cold pavement. But to me, it smelled like freedom. I stood on the sidewalk, right next to the construction site where I had met Arthur. The yellow caution tape was still flapping in the wind. The mud was still there, ugly and black. My shoes were ruined. My $3,000 suit was stiff with dried filth. My hair was coming loose from its bun. People were walking past me. They looked at my dirty clothes with confused expressions. Some of them wrinkled their noses, but I didn't care. I stood tall. I stood with my spine straight, my chin up, breathing in the city. A police cruiser pulled away from the curb. In the back seat, I saw a flash of white. Bianca. She was looking out the window, her face pressed against the glass. Our eyes met for a split second. There was no smirk on her face now. There was only fear. I watched the car disappear into the traffic of Manhattan. I did not feel happy. I did not feel a rush of victory. I just felt a quiet, settling peace. The scales had been balanced. The ledger was closed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver USB drive. It was warm from being close to my body. I closed my fingers around it, squeezing it tight, feeling the hard metal edges against my palm. I looked up at the sky, past the towering skyscrapers, past the noise and the greed and the ambition of the city. "We did it, Dad," I whispered. The wind caught my words and carried them away, up toward the steel beams and the concrete arches, up to where the structures held strong against the storm. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and resilience as much as I enjoyed bringing it to life for you. It is a reminder that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest roar. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Please leave a comment below, telling me your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoyed Melina's victory, please take a moment to subscribe to BitterSweet Drama Stories. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people. Your support means the world to us and helps us create more content like this. Stay strong, and see you in the next story.